you. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you for joining us lunchtime. You're all very welcome to today's Thriving from the Start Network event. I am delighted to open the event today. We're having an important and I'm sure informative conversation about loneliness. My name is Farima Derbyshire and I work at the City Mental Health Alliance, a not-for-profit organisation with a vision that every workplace protects, supports and creates positive mental health for their people. The Thriving from the Start Network, which is hosting today's event, is part of the CMHA. It's a free mental health network for people at the start of their career. The network is led by a committee of brilliant young professionals who are focused on challenging stigma, signposting to appropriate support when needed, and raising awareness of the very particular challenges that impact the mental health of people in the first few years of their career or final years of education. If you aren't already a member of the network and would like to be kept up to date with our resources and events, we'll pop a link in the chat soon. And today's focus is on loneliness, and it ties in with the theme for next week's Mental Health Awareness Week. Recent research from the CMHA revealed that 69% of young professionals said that experiences of loneliness have negatively impacted their mental health in the last year. So that's nearly 7 in 10 young professionals. And we're just going to run a completely anonymous poll in the at the moment, just to get an idea of what people think about this subject. If you can pop it up, Kate, that'd be great.
Great. Hopefully people can see that. If you can't see the poll, I know sometimes if you're on your phones or on iPads and things like that, you might not be able to see the poll. We're just asking, do you think that loneliness can be a challenge for people in the first few years of their career? And we're just saying yes or no. So if you can't see the poll and you want to put an answer in the chat, please do share that way. Otherwise, we'll be closing the poll very shortly. So please do jump in with your answer in the next 5 seconds or so.
Thank you. I can see how people think it can be a challenge, and that really reflects the research, the quant and qual research that we've done. So thank you for sharing. I'm going to hand over to Gemma Timmons from the Network Committee, who will guide us through a conversation with some great speakers today. Do feel free to join in and comment in the chat, but can I please encourage you, if you have any questions, to put it through the Q&A function. So over to you, Gemma.
Thanks a lot, Farima, and lovely to be joined by all of you today. I'm Gemma Timmons from the Thriving from the Start Network Committee, and I'm also a senior consultant at Wyman. And I'm delighted to be able to share and introduce you to Shafran, a professor of translational psychology at UCL, and also Josh Cronin, a graduate consultant at Atkins Limited, to give you what I'm sure will be a very human and personal insight into what loneliness is. And speaking of the very human, if you hear some background noise, it's just some drilling outside, so please do forgive that. But with that, over to Josh. So Josh, if I can start off by asking, how are you and what stage of your career are you at?
Hi Gemma, and hello everyone. It's great to be able to speak and chat about loneliness. I'm doing really well today. I had a lovely long weekend up in Mid Wales, which was really refreshing. I am literally 3.5 weeks into my new role as a graduate consultant with Atkins on their junior consultant development program. So that is a program for graduates. But that's not my first job since graduating from university. For a couple of years, I did do a pastoral role with a church-based organisation in Bristol. So that's me, Gemma.
Thank you for giving that little colour into you as a speaker, and a nice setting then to go into a conversation about what you think about today's focus, which is loneliness, and whether you have an experience that you'd be able to and like to share with this group.
Sure, I do. I think the first place to start is, in the past couple of years, I felt the effects of loneliness without really recognizing it. That's to say, I wouldn't have been able to say at that time I was lonely. Now, with the benefit of hindsight and various contexts that help me realize, I can say I have felt lonely in the past. So let me dig into that a little. So if you go back to the spring of last year, when I think that winter-spring lockdown began to ease, and I began to be able to see more and more people and meet with friends in larger groups, my well-being really improved. That combined with actually another CMHA event really helped me realize, oh crikey, these past few months I have been feeling lonely. I'll tell you what it was like. It was, at times it was hard to get out of bed, even to go on to video calls where you'd be seeing people and you think, oh, that would help you not feel lonely. It didn't really. I'd really got to a point where even that was hard. I think that's been, I guess, one side of my experience with loneliness, Gemma. I think there's really another side, which I haven't felt recently, but I have felt in the past, actually more when I was at university. And that was being in the situation when you're in large groups, but you still feel lonely. For me, and this I guess is an individual thing, for me that's weird, because being in groups of people usually energizes me. But I could find myself in a group of friends having drinks at a pub and just feel disconnected. I hope that helps, Gemma. Where do you want to go next?
It certainly does, and I and I'm sure everyone else in the call appreciates how candidly you talk about this, because as you may have realized and felt yourself, there is quite a bit of stigma around loneliness. Would you agree? In talking about it and discussing it.
Yeah. There is a stigma, isn't there? I think it's just. I think in this day and age, when we're so connected, typically because of technology, be it video calls, be it text, WhatsApp, whatever medium people use, you think, oh, how on earth can you be so lonely when you're so connected? But we do. People do feel lonely. I have felt lonely. And I guess I'd hope, I'm trying to do this myself in conversations with my own friends, is to create an environment where we can speak about feeling lonely.
And do you think that loneliness is something that other people may have experienced, and indeed, do you think you recognize it in other people around you?
Yeah, starting with the second question first. I think now that I've recognized it for myself, I'm now able to begin to recognize it in other people. I would say, I think even in the past few weeks, starting a new role alongside many other new colleagues, where for a lot of those colleagues, they're in a new city, new job, trying to build a new network, be it of colleagues or friends, in professional and social contexts. Thankfully, I have had conversations with a few individuals who've been willing to be vulnerable, and they've said, I feel slightly disconnected at the moment. I think also I've seen in for other individuals I've known, they've had to travel to a new city, be it for a new job or be it because they're beginning education in that city, and partly because of COVID and the lockdowns, there's been a real obstacle to making friends, and that has led to loneliness.
And I suppose finally, now that we're coming out of lockdown a little bit and you've reflected on it, how do you think this has impacted you looking back, and how do you feel it's impacted on your mental health and behavior, this experience?
I think I've alluded it to a little. Now I've been able to recognize it. I think my hope is in the future, if I do end up feeling lonely, I'd know. And then that might help me talk about it with close friends. Or it might help me, I guess, put in a little more effort to make friends if I'm in a situation where I don't quite have that support network. I know that can be hard for some people, but I guess that's something I know I could be doing for myself. And then also, I guess it perhaps helps me empathize with people I meet who have either had to move or they're just in a new context. And I hope I can be a listening ear to them.
I'm sure that you will be able to, with the level of introspection and understanding that you very clearly have. So thank you very much, Josh, for your candidness and all of your
You're
reflections.
welcome.
And Ros, before we jump into a bit more about yourself and your focus as well, it'd be interesting to hear what you think now that you've heard of Josh's experience.
So Josh, I think you've been very brave and open about your experiences, because there is still a stigma attached to saying that you felt lonely, and saying that actually even Zoom calls or these sorts of calls that are meant to connect you to people really don't cut the mustard sometimes. And it sort of relates to a comment, I think, in a question in the Q&A, as well as a comment about you can feel lonely in a crowd. So this distinction between feeling lonely and being alone is really quite an important one. And I think you really exemplified the emotions that go along with that, as well as difficulty in recognizing it, especially in the context of a pandemic. But knowing what's normal, knowing what's not, knowing if it's temporary, knowing how long lasting it's going to be. All of those are challenges when we come to thinking about loneliness.
Thank you very much, Ros. And thank you again, Josh, for all of your thoughts and reflections. So over to you, focusing a bit more now, Ros. Can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and your own focus in your work?
So I'm a clinical psychologist, and I'm a professor of translational psychology. So I do clinical research at UCL. And I've really done a lot of work in things that seem really important, I think is how I would summarize it. So things like depression, anxiety, children who have mental health problems in the context of chronic illness, and perfectionism. And the interest in loneliness really was because it's so obviously a problem, and there's so important to understand loneliness and to think about how we can help. And fundamentally, loneliness is a psychological phenomenon. If we have a definition, which is sort of a perceived discrepancy between your actual relationships and your desired relationships. And I can just see things flashing up in the chat about feeling lonely in a dysfunctional relationship, because that's a very good example of how you can be in a relationship. It's not that you're not around people, but it's not the sort of relationship that you want. It doesn't have the communication that you want within it, and you don't feel partnered. So that's why sharing experiences like Josh has is really fundamental to understanding and treating loneliness and helping people overcome it.
Thanks a lot, Ros, for that. And you allude to the importance of loneliness and talking about it. So why do you think it's important that Mental Health Awareness Week specifically draws attention to loneliness this year?
So there's a very close relationship between loneliness and mental health. And if you feel lonely, you're more likely to have mental health problems. But if you've got mental health problems, you're more likely to feel lonely. So a very clear example is social anxiety. So webinar is a very good format. It's anonymous, nobody can see you, not being picked on, but Zoom meetings, you're still there, slightly more social, can evoke more anxiety in that way. But if you feel socially anxious, then it stops you from taking advantage of the networking and the meeting opportunities. But you can also see, though, if you have some social skills problems and some social deficits, that actually you can't make friends, you can't form the connections, even if you want to. So it's quite complicated. And I think sort of a real key message is no one size fits all. different people feel lonely for different reasons and at different times of their life and at different stages of their career, and the transitions and moving down and starting new jobs and starting new roles, all of those things can be real triggers for feelings of loneliness.
And you gave us a definition of loneliness earlier and have alluded to different examples of it, but could you expand a little bit more on not only what loneliness is beyond the definition, but how it can impact us, especially thinking about the focus of this webinar, people who are towards, you know, the early stages of their career?
Yeah, so I think when I can just also see a comment in the chat again about social media. So it isn't, if you're alone, you're looking at social media still, you're looking at other people having the connections that you don't have, having the relationships that look perfect on the outside that you want. So that can really exacerbate feelings of loneliness. And there's a big should, I think, when you're starting your career, big should about going out and meeting people, a big should about taking advantage of all of the opportunities. But actually, if you are struggling to get out of bed, it's a million miles away, the idea about going to after work drinks or about meeting up with people or taking the initiative and opening a conversation, when you might feel actually they've got loads of other friends, they don't want to be friends with me, they're already established, you know, I'm new to the firm, why would they want to be friends, you know, that I'm breaking in somewhere I'm not wanted. So I think those are the sorts of things that can make it really difficult. There's a big should, there are the opportunities, so you feel guilty, but you can't, and you end up sort of stuck in a cycle.
And linked to the question I posed to Josh as well earlier, why do you think that there is such a stigma around talking about loneliness? Because normally we think if there's a problem, then you try and solve it and acknowledge the problem first of all. But it sounds like we're not very good at doing that on the whole, are we?
Yeah, and I mean, when we try and recruit for different research trials for all different sorts of problems, it's difficult. But the hardest one to recruit for is loneliness. If you put an advert, do you feel lonely? It's very, very difficult. And I think if I was to answer your question really honestly and really brutally, Gemma, I think it's because for some people in their head, admitting you feel lonely is sort of like saying, I'm unlikable. If you're unlikable, if you don't have any friends, answer to take part in a research trial. You know, nobody's going to do it. And it's not like that. And that's why seeing it in the context of mental health is so important, because it isn't that people aren't likable. It isn't that they have characteristics that mean people don't want to be friendly with them, don't want to have meaningful, intimate connectivity and relationships. But it's just very challenging for mental health reasons, for social skills reasons, for what's going on in your life reasons, all sorts of environmental reasons, as well as individual ones. But that's why I think there's a lot of self-stigma. So it's more self-stigma, I think, as well as kind of societal stigma. So you've got both going on, which is why it's so prevalent and prominent.
And do you think on the self-stigma point, it's a case that people recognize the loneliness, but then refuse to talk about it, acknowledge it, do anything? Or is it that we're just bad at spotting the signs and we put it down to other things?
I think Josh couldn't have done a better job at opening with I didn't recognize it. I really didn't recognize it. And it can become so embedded. I can see the chats going about social media, because it's so embedded in our everyday lives, feeling different, scrolling, feeling you're scrolling, you're thinking everybody else is having a good time. You think, I feel lonely, or do you feel inadequate? Or do you say, oh, there's something I can do about that? Or do you just feel utterly hopeless and miserable and dejected? And, it doesn't make you feel as this is an external problem that can be solved. It makes you feel like it's something about you.
And for those people who are experiencing loneliness, rather than going down one of these routes that you cited, whether it's doom scrolling or feeling dejected or just not really knowing how to tackle it, what can we do about it?
So the other thing I like to do in my research is my work on things that can, can be helped, and that there are things that you can do. So one of the important things is to know that for many, many people, and the majority of people, loneliness is temporary. So loneliness does pass. And I think knowing that is really important, because when you're in it, it feels like it will last forever. It feels like you'll never make friends. It feels like you'll never be part of the organization and so on. But I think that what's helpful really is understanding that it's temporary, and understanding what are the barriers to those connections. And you know, not everybody wants those connections. It may be that you have very few social relationships, but that's fine. You're exhausted after a day's work. You want to go home. You're not miserable, and that's fine. But if you do want those connections and it's making you unhappy, then I think understanding what those barriers are. Is it knowing how to break in? Is it skills, or is it beliefs that actually they're already a tight group, they won't want any friends, they're sorted? And thinking about ways in which you can test those beliefs, and maybe not starting with a massive group trying to break in, but is there just one person who you feel might be might be easier to approach? Is that person had a disruption to their social networks, and would appreciate that kind of an offer? And can you grade it? So you're not saying, let's go on a big night out, let's go away for the weekend as your first sort of effort, but I'm just going to get coffee, does anybody want to come? So actually, if somebody says no, it's not a rejection, and thinking, well, it's not a rejection, but if they say yes, then you've got a social contact and an opportunity to build on going forward. So those are small things that people can do.
And I suppose to take a step back then, at this early stage of career start, how do you think does that differ in a sort of work setting versus the personal setting? Because I think there can often sometimes be a bit of a struggle when people experience loneliness in the personal versus the professional environment.
So I think people have different expectations for their professional relationships than they do for their personal ones. So for a professional relationship, you might be appropriately sort of wary about disclosing really personal information about you, and sharing your fears and your insecurities. And that's perfectly appropriate in a work setting, but that sort of level of disclosure is sort of necessary for intimate, closer relationships. So it's sort of, in some ways, it's making your expectations clear. Some people are very happy having work as work and home as home, and there's a separation, and they need to get on with their work and get along with people, but they're not regarding them as a source of friendship. Whereas others say, well, actually, they are my source of friendship. I want to be friends with people that I work with. I want to have those sort of deeper, more meaningful relationships. So I think there's quite a lot of variation. I don't know if I'm answering your question exactly, Gemma. Do you want to?
No. You certainly are, and I think that the key point, as you said, it's the nuance, and it's the knowing when and how and to what extent to be vulnerable and open with the people around you, but recognizing it as well.
Yeah, and of course, you can overshare in a work context too, and so there's a sense of of having the skills to know what's appropriate and with whom and when, and that's actually very complicated. It's something that some people just are real naturals at knowing that, but for others it requires a bit more of a concerted effort. And I think if you have ever confided in somebody, and we will have all probably done this, at least as children, and then you find out that they've betrayed that trust and that they've told somebody else, that can really affect your views of relationships, and the implications of that happening in a work context are quite manifest. So I think you have to think about what it is you want from your work environment, and how you can build relationships that are meaningful, that you can feel connected if that's what you want, but in a safe way too.
Absolutely. And before we sort of go into many questions that are flying in, and it's wonderful to see people engaging so much with this discussion, is there anything else that you'd like to draw out on loneliness in early careers specifically?
I think it's quite, for me, I think it's quite helpful to, in my mind, have this distinction between sort of social isolation and loneliness. So some of the practical aspects about being, when you move in if you've had to move you're starting in a new place and in a new city, then you're going to have social isolation potentially, as well as all the other sort of things going on. If you're in an environment where actually the environment is very familiar to you, but it's the quality of those relationships, so it's not that you're socially isolated, you're meeting lots of people, you just don't feel connected to them, then actually that's a different type of problem and might need a different type of solution.
That's very helpful. Thank you. Thank you very much. And I suppose now as well, Josh, I'll reflect on one of the things we just talked about with Ros, which is, how to be open about loneliness and mental health issues. So what's your view, firstly, Josh, on how you would encourage others to do so?
I think sometimes it could be easiest to lead the way. That can be hard. So I've been thinking about this myself. If I'm able to say openly with some colleagues or friends, I was feeling lonely at a particular time in a particular context, then because I've done it, I'd hope that if they are feeling that way, or generally if there's anything else to do with their well-being or mental health, I'd hope that because I've led the way, they can open up if they feel like they can. I think that's my only thought on that, Gemma.
No, that's very helpful, Josh, and definitely encouraging a culture of healthy sharing and open and honest communication is I think a good one. And Ros, sort of building on our earlier discussion about it, what would your reflections be on how you'd encourage others to be open about loneliness and mental health issues more broadly?
Yeah, I mean, I think just I was scrolling through the chat as well, trying to think about, I mean, people's experiences and their sharing now are wonderful. The people here are doing what they should in terms of taking advantage of the opportunities and the networks available to help destigmatize and say, I went to this webinar, they were talking about loneliness. That sort of opens up a conversation, and it's a sort of non-threatening way to open up the conversation, which is why I think these sorts of events and these sorts of networks are really very important. But I think there's a comment in the chat about coming off Facebook is quite helpful for some people, but equally not trying to do big groups, trying to do small groups and small groups of friends, people that you trust. Disclosure is kind of two ways, isn't it? So when people tell you things about them, and it doesn't have to be mental health related, but they're still personal issues, then it's easier to disclose back. But somebody has to make that first move, and being sort of sensitive to other people's confidences is really important as well, and being able to feel confident in disclosing for yourself. But I'm going to give an example with a friend. This was a long time ago, and I asked him how much a sweater he was wearing and how much a sweater cost, and he took it incredibly personally. And he said, I don't know, he said, how can you ask me that? It's such a, but I didn't realize it was so sensitive. But he felt it was a very intrusive personal question. And we'd had conversations about things that I would have regarded as far more intimate. So there has to be this kind of balance, because for you, it's going to be very difficult to say, I sometimes feel lonely. But it may be that other people will just go, yeah, of course I feel lonely. You're in a new job, in a new setting. Why wouldn't you feel lonely? Or, yes, it's difficult adjusting to a work colleague kind of relationship and the expectations from that, and knowing where boundaries lie. I remember when I first started, it was really challenging, but now I do this, and there's a lunch group and there's a webinar. So it's taking that first step, and taking that first step in a way that is in a safe environment where it's in some ways mutual disclosure, I think is probably optimal if you're able to do that.
Very helpful. Thank you, Ros, and Josh as well for that question. And another one that's come in linked to what we were talking about is for Ros. Are there any tips on coping with loneliness when it comes and then goes?
Yeah, so, and I think that question is also about loneliness in different contexts, isn't it? So maybe lonely at home, but not lonely at work. So in terms of the sort of the temporary nature of most emotions, so it can be low mood, it can be anxiety, the kind of idea that you ride the crest of the wave, the urge surfing, and the understanding that these emotions are part of human nature, they're temporary, they will pass. That's quite helpful. But also thinking about things that you enjoy doing to distract yourself. So the sort of idea that actually there are some hobbies and interests that you can do on your own that are more, you can do beading if you like, that perhaps you've not had the time to do before, that takes it away from, oh, other people are out having fun, versus I'm at home doing what I like to do in my pajamas. Nothing wrong with that, as opposed to, I'm sitting at home wishing I was there. So I think there are different things, and there are lots of resources as well about different things and different groups. I'd say the key to finding a group and finding your tribe, I think, is one of the expression, is it's got to be personally meaningful and valuable to you. So, you might not think your idea of fun would be to join a swimming group that goes in a freezing cold lake at 6 a.m. No, thank you. However, there might be somebody on this call that goes, well, that's a fantastic idea. That's exactly what I'd love to do. So it has to be something that ties in with your own values, is personally meaningful to you, to be forming these connections. Because if you're just trying to, if you're disclosing and trying to form relationships with people that are not, you wouldn't naturally do, then I think that comes with a high risk and the risk of perhaps backfiring.
Got it. Thank you very much, Roz. And one question that's just come in is this idea of a vicious circle. So it'd be very interesting to hear what you think about it. The idea that you might know that from mental well-being, as you said, it is good and encouraging and positive to connect with loved ones and friends, but actually you feel like you just don't really want to. You don't really feel that you have connection with your friends, whether that's in person or because of social media, which then exacerbates it. So what are your thoughts on then this vicious circle?
Yeah. I'm a CBT therapist, I'm a cognitive behavior therapist, and we love our vicious circles. There is nothing we like more than thoughts, feelings, behavior, and how they sort of interact. And the trick is if you can turn a vicious circle into a virtuous cycle. That's kind of the goal, that if you can intervene in any area of that vicious cycle, then it has mutual benefits elsewhere. So I can see in the chat someone has talked about volunteering, and actually altruism and being altruistic is very good. It's a very, very good suggestion for helping break it in terms of behavior. But then you've got this problem that's saying, well, okay, in a moment when I felt better and I sort of volunteered, but now it comes to it, I really don't want to do it. I really feel like I can't. And if you then feel that you've let people down, then you can be stuck in that vicious cycle. If you are able to go, then you can meet other people, you can feel better from doing it. And I think if you feel really very low and you feel really unable to engage in things, and it's happened a few times that you've had these false starts, you might want to be getting some external support, so that actually that you're going, whether or not it's with a colleague or a friend, or whether or not it's a therapist and the support from that's being offered through your organization, but actually somebody helping you break that vicious cycle when you're really suffering from depression is important. There's no reason you should have to do this alone. It's very tough. With social anxiety, when it becomes really difficult like that, then I think get some help to help you break that cycle and turn it into a virtuous one. I don't know, Josh, what you'd think about that.
I mean, maybe this helps. I mean, the thing I'm wondering, and I'm going to tie it in with the social media piece, is for many of us, social media has become a habit. So that's part of the vicious cycle, right? And then I guess maybe as a question, which I think maybe you've already begun to answer here, was to turn it into a virtuous cycle, we need to replace that bad habit with a good habit. So I'm just wondering whether there are any other good habits that help.
Yeah, and sort of good habits that aren't shoulds. I think that's the other thing. I should be doing this, I should be going out, I should be So sort of balancing the shoulds and the sort of acceptance. But I think you're absolutely right. Social media and scrolling and multitasking and distraction, they're all part of everybody's lives. And I think the first thing, actually, if you could take a sort of an ABC kind of approach to it. So what comes before scrolling? What's going to happen is you're going to come home and you're going to start. And once you've started scrolling, it's really hard to stop. And it's probably easier to have an antecedent to stop it before it starts. So if you know that you're going to come home and you're going to scroll, or you're going to leave work and you're going to scroll on the computer, on your phone, you might want to say, actually, I'm going to listen to music on the way back, or even delete your app so that it's really hard to do it. Or if you're very technically minded, you can have it open at particular periods of time. But you've got to replace a habit with something that is very practical. You've got to identify it, and it's easier to break that habit and replace it with something that happens earlier. Because once you're in the midst of it, you get sucked down like quicksand. It's really very difficult. So I think getting it early, and then sort of reflecting on the difference. So if I listen to music on the way home rather than scrolling, how do I feel when I get home? Do I feel better, or do I feel worse because I don't know what's gone on, or do I miss it? And is that the same if I do that over sort of a 3 to 4 day period? And if after 3 to 4 days you feel better, then you've replaced one habit with another. If on the other hand, actually the Facebook was all right, and you found that it was easier to break away from it or contain it, then that's also really important information. And I can just see the suggestion about having a mindfulness app or a meditation app, doing that on the train home instead, if that's going to work for you, or your Tesco shopping, or whatever it is that you're trying to do. It doesn't really matter, but it's about catching it early, replacing it, and then reflecting on the consequences, a kind of ABC type of approach.
Thank you both of you for that. It's good to have not only the discussion, but something very, very practical that people on the call can take away and try for themselves as potentially how to solve and preempt these feelings as well of loneliness. A question for Josh, if I can switch tack to the sort of professional environment, is how, from the chat, is how has the feeling of loneliness impacted your interactions when in the office, and how have you tackled this?
Well, I think for starters, feelings of loneliness has been a driver for me to actually get in the office. So starting a new role in which there are various positions with different members of staff on how they're working. Thankfully, my workplace is flexible. Even a colleague of mine, he's only been into the office 4 times since March the 23rd, 2020. For myself, I had 4 days in the office last week because I know I need it. Have I answered that question, Gemma? do you want to prompt me further?
No, that's very, very helpful. And perhaps if we focus as well on the more senior members of the office environment, how about if and when you or people around you've seen feel lonely when you can't bond or relate to the more senior team, so partners or directors? How do you feel about that, or how has that impacted you?
Yeah, I mean, this is only my imagination here. I could imagine a situation where you don't have video calls, say, with colleagues at more senior levels than yourself when you're starting out. But that feels like a barrier. That feels like a barrier to being known within the business. That feels like a barrier to seeing, for your successes to be seen. And that would be a barrier to learning, because I think for me, one of the things which I know I've missed, we use the term water cooler conversations, or conversations over making a mug of tea or coffee, in which that's a chance either to be personable and open, or it's a chance for learning. which benefits us as individuals in our careers, but usually collectively as a whole organization. I mean, they're the things I could imagine that would be tricky. I mean, I'm thankful that I've got an environment where I have been able to rub shoulders with all levels of seniority, and I know that that's a really great thing. And I'd hope that other organizations at least think about how they're going to work in the hybrid environment to foster openness between colleagues at different stages, for the sake of the benefits I mentioned.
And Ros, perhaps, thank you, Josh, for that firstly. And building on that, Ros, what do you think workplaces can do to support young people coming into the workplace who are, at risk of feeling lonely, perhaps? Can we expect anything from employers or line managers?
Yes, I'm sure Farima is actually best placed to to answer exactly what you said. Farima, if you wanted to answer that question.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you. I think that's I think an understanding and an awareness. Employers should be aware that this can be a challenge, and clearly we know that there are lots of different ways in which people can help. And I'm not going to say that a line manager needs to have the answer for every person that comes in the business, but I think firstly, to have a general awareness of the mental health challenges that face the people they may be managing that are specific to this age group. And I think for loneliness, as you said, Ros, it is just one of those points in your life when so much changes and you leave support networks and friendship networks and family networks and you're in a new environment. And so there is a risk, and it's the awareness there. And it's the having the skills to spot it and the having the skills to have that conversation, and people feeling able to have that conversation with you. And that's not a very specific answer, but it's a readiness and a willingness to understand. I hope that answers the question. Gemma and Ros, feel free to build on that.
Certainly
well.
did. I was going to say, Ros, if please do build on it if you have anything.
Yeah, no, I think I agree completely, and I think there's sort of discussion as to, is loneliness a mental health problem in itself? And it's not sort of, we have a sort of so the doctors have a Bible of, what's there, and it's sort of anxiety is there and depression is there and eating problems are there, but loneliness isn't there. So I think, again, it's sort of because it's almost universal for everybody to sort of feel lonely at some point. It's about really having people understand its implications and the seriousness of it. And for some people, and for it not to be dismissed, because it takes an awful lot to be able to disclose that you feel lonely. We've talked about that before. And then to have it dismissed as, oh, well, of course you feel lonely, you've just come down for that, that's unhelpful. So I think being able to sort of recognize how difficult it is to have these conversations, how important it is to react empathically, and then think about the range of options, whether or not there are resources, whether or not there are networks, whether or not there are opportunities, or sort of positions of responsibility can also help. So they can be challenging, but if you were given the task of organizing the webinars, Gemma, or running it, you actually then have to meet people, you have to liaise with people, and then people from other firms, and then you say, well, let's meet up to discuss how it's going to go. So you can sort of build on that in a natural way as well. So I think there are lots of different options, but you do need the support of people at work for sure.
I'm sorry, I'm just going to jump in again, but I wondered if, including you, Jem, if anyone had reflections, and I'm conscious of time, but just on the implications of hybrid working and how that can, if anyone has any thoughts on that and how that can lead to more disconnection or feelings of loneliness. That is a new way of working. That wasn't there. And look, there were some clear benefits to the flexibility and the opportunity. It wasn't there when I started my career, but I just want to flag, maybe even just as a comment, that is something, even if you are going to the office, other people might not be there, just because the workplace is a community, right?
Yeah. So I think it's a game changer, really, because as well, when Josh is into work on those 4 days, there's still fewer people around than there would have been before. So there's hybrid working, which is challenging. There's the fact when you go into the office, it's not as it was. And I think there's an issue with senior people being, more likely to be working from home for many reasons. They don't need that sort of social networking in the same way, and that's challenging too. So absolutely hybrid working. And I think even sort of a new way of working when you're not working in a hybrid way, but just being back in the office when there are fewer people because they're not there, sort of hybrid working, but a variant of it. It's challenging too.
Can I share too? Just on something my team at work does. We still do this over Teams calls. So it's still virtual, but it'll be people joining from either at home or in the office. In our team meetings, like we had one this morning, we do a quiz together. And that is just a short activity in which we can bond over and just enjoy the little bits of competition that come from it. It only takes 10 minutes. And often the quiz is just totally unrelated to our work, but it's just something that means the whole team at all seniority levels, they're on the call for that. They're keen for that. And I just hope, things like that could be a good thing that could be introduced just to, I guess, build community, I want to say.
Absolutely. And I think it's nice to wrap up the Q&A on such a positive note, which is there are challenges around loneliness, which have been exacerbated by lockdown, going into it, being in it, coming out of it. And it's especially important for people at this stage of their career, but there is opportunities to improve and in fact for workplaces to help too. So thank you very much. And now to flag to everyone else on the call, the anonymous poll will be coming up soon again. So please do click on that when it flashes up on your screen.
So yeah, it should be showing now. And again, if you can't see it, we're just asking the question, after attending this event, do you feel better equipped to deal with or support someone who is struggling with loneliness? And it's just a couple of answer options. So if you can't see the poll, but you do want to share your thoughts, please do use the chat box for that. I'll just give you a few more seconds to answer that, and then I can share the results.
Thank you also very much, everyone, for making this time in your no doubt busy days, for coming along. And of course, especially to Farima, Kate, Josh and Roz as well, for sharing your experiences and for helping with this. So thank you very much. And we will be sharing the recording with everyone afterwards.
Lovely, thank you very much, everyone. I'm just going to put a link to the Thriving to the Start network in the chat box here. If you want to find out more about the Thriving from the Start network, you can click on that link and it'll take you to more information about that. As Gemma mentioned, we will be sending some resources out afterwards. Lovely, I'm going to stop sharing the poll results now. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you everyone for coming. Enjoy the rest of your day, everyone.
Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. I'm going to end the event now.
Thanks, Gemma and Farima, Josh, for letting me be part of this. What a fantastic network.
Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.